The janitor walked slowly through the quiet halls of the music academy. His shoes made soft sounds on the polished floor, and his old hands carried a mop and a bucket. Every evening was the same. The students had already gone home, their laughter and chatter leaving the building empty. Only the soft echo of his cleaning tools and the faint smell of polish filled the air. He worked silently, always careful not to disturb anything, because this was not his world. The academy was filled with music, wealth, and talent, and he was only the one who swept away the dust. He was not a young man. His back bent slightly as he pushed the mop across the shining floors. His clothes were plain, his shirt always a little faded. He wore the same heavy shoes every day. Students passed him during the afternoons, some offering polite nods, others not even noticing he was there. To them, he was part of the background, a shadow that kept the school clean but invisible. No one thought of asking him his name or wondering about his life. Still, he had grown used to it. He knew his role. He needed the job, and so he did it with quiet dignity. He never complained, never spoke out of turn. He kept his head down. His reward was simple: the rhythm of his work, the peace of the night hours, and the silence after all the voices faded. Yet, there was one thing that often caught his eyes. In the main hall stood a grand piano. Its black surface shone under the golden lights. The instrument looked more like a jewel than a tool for music. Everyone at the academy knew who it belonged to. It was the prized piano of a rich girl, the daughter of one of the most important patrons of the school. The piano was her treasure, protected and guarded like something sacred. No one touched it except her. The janitor would often pause his sweeping and look at it from far away. His eyes softened when they fell on the shining keys. His hands would tighten around the mop handle as if remembering something from long ago. But he would always turn back to his work. There was something about the piano that called to him. The students never noticed, but when he walked past it, his steps slowed. He would glance at the keys, the way the light reflected on them. He remembered nights long ago when music had filled his own home. But that was a memory buried under years of hard work and forgotten dreams. The rich girl whose piano it was often passed by him in the mornings. She wore neat uniforms, her hair shining, her confidence glowing in every step. Students surrounded her, whispering and admiring. She hardly noticed the janitor. If her eyes ever landed on him, it was only for a second, like one might look at a lamppost or a wall. He was invisible to her world, and yet, when he looked at her piano, his heart beat faster. He could not explain why, but it was as if his fingers itched to touch the keys. The hall was always empty at night, and that was when his thoughts grew louder. As he cleaned near the grand piano, he would sometimes stop. He would stare at it for a few long seconds, wondering what it would feel like to sit on the bench again, to let his hands glide over the ivory keys. But then he would sigh, shake his head, and force himself to move away. What right did a janitor have to touch such a treasure, especially one belonging to a girl so powerful and rich? But deep inside, the desire never went away. It was a quiet flame that flickered every time he passed the piano. He tried to bury it, reminding himself that his job was only to clean, not to dream. Yet the piano stood there, night after night, shining like a silent invitation. He had promised himself many times that he would never give in to temptation, but the heart is not always ruled by promises. That evening, as the lights of the hall glowed warmly, the janitor paused once more. His eyes fell on the piano. His work was finished. The floors gleamed. The chairs were stacked neatly. The building was silent. He put down the mop and bucket. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped closer. Each footstep echoed softly in the vast hall. He stopped just a few feet away, staring at the polished surface. His reflection looked back at him, tired and aged, but in his eyes was a spark. He reached out slowly. His fingertips hovered above the smooth wood. His breath grew shallow. It was only a piano, and yet, to him, it felt like a doorway to something lost. He pulled his hand back quickly, fear rushing through him. What if someone saw? What if she saw? His heart pounded at the thought. He shook his head again and turned away, gripping his bucket tightly. He walked back toward the door. But his mind did not leave the piano. It stayed with him like a whisper, promising something more, something waiting to be unlocked. The janitor left the hall that night, but he carried with him the weight of both longing and fear. He told himself he would never dare, but deep inside, he knew the piano was not finished with him, not yet. The Seu grand piano stood in the center of the academy's main hall like a silent king. Its glossy black surface reflected the chandeliers above, and every visitor who walked into the room was drawn to it first. It was more than just an instrument. It was a symbol of wealth, of talent, of untouchable pride. Everyone at the academy knew the story of this piano. It belonged to a rich girl, the daughter of a powerful patron whose money kept the academy shining. For her, the piano was not only a tool for practice. It was her throne, her crown, her stage. Students whispered about it in corners. They said the piano cost more than all. Their homes put together. They said even the teachers treated it with respect. No one dared touch it, not even to test a single note. The keys looked too clean, too pure, as if they were waiting only for her hands. When she sat at the bench and played, all eyes in the room turned to her. Some admired her skill, others envied her, but everyone knew better than to go near her. Treasure. The janitor passed by that piano every night. His eyes often lingered on it. He tried to keep his steps steady, to remind himself of his place. But the piano glowed under the light like it was calling him. The wood seemed to hum quietly, as if holding secrets. He could almost imagine the music rising from it, though the room was silent. The girl herself had a presence that matched her piano. She walked with confidence, her chin high, her friends trailing behind her like shadows. She was not cruel, but she did not notice the small people around her either. When she passed the janitor, her gaze never truly met his. Her eyes were fixed on higher things, on music competitions, on her reputation, on her future. The janitor was only another part of the building, like the walls, the mop, or the floor she walked across. But the piano was different. To her, it was life itself. She was protective of it in ways others could not understand. She polished it herself after every practice. Her friends teased her about treating it like a child, but she didn't care. To her, the piano was more than wood and strings. It was the voice of her soul. That was why the idea of anyone else touching it was unthinkable. There were stories of younger students sneaking into the hall and being caught just trying to press one key. They were scolded, embarrassed, and never dared again. It became an unspoken law in the academy. No one touched her piano. The janitor knew this better than anyone. He had seen the way she looked at people who stood too close. He had heard the whispers of students who warned each other. He knew if he ever dared to sit on that bench, even for a second, his life would change, and not for the better. And yet, every time he passed, his heart grew heavy, as if the piano itself remembered him, as if it wanted his hands on the keys. The main hall was always so grand. The walls were tall, decorated with golden frames holding portraits of old musicians. The chandeliers sparkled. The floor gleamed after his cleaning, and in the middle of it all, the piano stood like a jewel. To the students, it was a dream. To the girl, it was her possession. To the janitor, it was temptation. He often found himself slowing his sweeping near it. His eyes would catch the way the black surface reflected the light. His hands would ache as if they wanted to move, not to clean, but to play. He told himself he was foolish. He told himself he had no right. He was only the man with the mop, not a student, not a performer. But deep inside, the music in his heart stirred every time he saw it. The rich girl had many admirers, and when she played, the hall filled with people. The janitor sometimes stood far at the back, pretending to be working just so he could listen. Her music was strong, proud, full of energy. But when she finished, the piano looked strangely quiet, as if it had more to say, something it was holding. Back the janitor would listen until the applause faded, and then he would slip away into the shadows again. There were days when he thought about what might happen if he ever dared. Would she scream at him? Would he lose his job? Would the whole academy laugh? He imagined it all in secret, but the thought never left him. Every night when he walked past, the weight of that piano pressed on him, louder than his footsteps, heavier than his mop. The piano was not just hers. It had become a line that divided the world. On one side were the rich, the talented, the powerful. On the other side were people like him, silent, unseen, forgotten. The piano stood between them, like a wall, and yet it also held the possibility of a bridge. The janitor did not know it yet, but the day would come when his hand would cross that line, when the silence of the hall would be broken. For now, he kept walking, polishing, cleaning. His eyes lowered, his thoughts hidden, but every time the light hit those perfect keys, his heart gave a small ache. The grand piano waited in the hall like a secret waiting to be discovered, and deep inside, the janitor knew he could not resist it forever. The night was quiet. The music academy had emptied hours ago. The lights in the hall glowed softly, giving the grand piano a golden shine. The janitor walked slowly, his mop and bucket resting near the wall. He should have been finishing his work, but something kept pulling his eyes back to the piano. It stood there, untouched, like a secret, waiting. For him, he stopped in front of it. His heart beat faster. He had spent years avoiding this moment, telling himself it was dangerous, reminding himself of his place, but tonight felt different. The silence was heavy, almost inviting. He looked around. Every door was closed, every corridor empty. He was alone. His trembling hands reached out, as if they were moving on their own. He pulled the bench slightly and sat down. His old body creaked with the motion. His chest tightened. For a moment, he simply stared at the keys, so white, so pure. They looked alive, waiting for him. He closed his eyes and let his fingers touch them gently. A single note escaped, soft but clear. It echoed across the empty hall. His heart shivered, then without thinking he began to play. His fingers moved with memory, not practice. The music poured out, rising and falling, delicate and strong. His touch was gentle but filled with emotion. It was as if all the years of silence had been waiting for this one night. The hall, once empty and cold, now felt alive. He forgot who he was. He forgot the mop, the bucket, the endless days of being invisible. At that moment, he was not a janitor, he was a musician again. His body remembered what his mind had buried long ago. Every note carried a piece of his soul. Every chord was a story he had never spoken. But what he didn't know was that he was not alone. At the far end of the hall, footsteps echoed lightly. The rich girl had returned with her friends. They had left something behind and came back to retrieve it. She pushed the door open, laughing softly with her companions. But when her laughter faded, it was replaced with silence. Because what they saw stunned them. There on her piano sat the janitor, the man they never noticed, the man who cleaned floors and emptied bins. His back straightened, his fingers dancing on the keys like a master. The melody filled the air with beauty, more powerful than anything they had expected to hear. The girl froze. Her friends exchanged wide-eyed looks. None of them dared speak. The notes seemed to wrap around them, drawing them deeper into the moment. It was not the technical skill that shocked them. It was the emotion. The janitor's music was raw, filled with life, filled with a sadness and beauty that none of the students had ever managed to create. The janitor had no idea he had an audience. His eyes stayed closed, his body swayed gently with the music, his mind was far away, perhaps in another time, perhaps remembering nights when he had once played freely, before life had forced him to trade music for survival. Before he became the man who swept floors, the girl's heart raced. She had practiced on that piano for years. She had won competitions, received praise. But never had she heard it sound like this. The piano itself seemed different under his hands, more alive, more real. Her friends whispered but then fell silent, too afraid to break the spell. Finally, the janitor let the last note fade. His hands rested on the keys, his chest rose and fell heavily. He opened his eyes, and for the first time he realized he was not alone. He saw them standing there, their faces full of shock. His blood turned cold. He jumped up quickly, his knees trembled. He stammered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." He could not finish. Shame washed over him like a storm. He had broken the unspoken rule. He had touched what was never his. Worse, he had been caught. His eyes darted to the girl. She stood still, her face unreadable. He expected her to yell, to call for the teachers, to demand he be fired on the spot. His hands shook. He lowered his head, waiting for the end. But the room was silent. No laughter, no scolding, no anger. Just silence. His heart pounded, his throat felt dry. He tried to step away from the piano, but his feet refused to move. The students' eyes followed him, their expressions still frozen in awe. The girl finally took a step forward, slowly, quietly, her shoes tapping against the floor. The janitor felt each step like a hammer in his chest. He wanted to beg, to explain, but no words came. He simply stood there, trapped between shame and fear. The girl stopped by the piano. Her hand brushed lightly over the surface. She looked at him, and for the first time, their eyes met. He expected anger. He expected pride. Instead, her eyes softened for just a moment. She opened her mouth, but no words came out yet. The janitor lowered his gaze again, his hands clenched at his sides. He could still feel the echo of the music in his fingertips, but now all he felt was dread. He had crossed a line that could never be taken back. The hall remained silent. The grand piano, still shining, seemed to wait for what would happen next. The janitor stood frozen. The girls' friends held their breath, and in that quiet moment, the future of them all hung in the air like the last note of a song refusing to fade. The janitor's heart was still racing. He stood frozen beside the piano, his head lowered, his hands shaking. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the ground, but the silence of the hall trapped him. He could feel the stares of the students on his back, sharp and heavy. The rich girl stood near the piano now, her eyes fixed on him. He could not read her expression, and that made his fear even worse. Her friends whispered behind her, their voices low but full of surprise. "Did you hear that? He plays better than half the teachers here," one murmured. Another added, "But he touched her piano. He's in trouble for sure." Their words cut into him, reminding him of the mistake he had made. He never should have sat on the bench, never should have touched the keys. His dream had betrayed him. The girl raised her hand slightly, and her friends fell silent. The hall grew quiet again, the air thick with suspense. The janitor wanted to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but his throat closed. Only a weak whisper escaped. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." His words faded, lost in the vastness of the room. The girl did not answer right away. Instead, she sat down on the piano bench. Her fingers brushed the keys, but she did not play. She looked at him again, her eyes sharp, curious, almost searching. The janitor held his breath. His heart pounded like a drum. This was the moment he had feared. She could call for the headmaster. She could have him fired. She could humiliate him in front of everyone, but she did none of those things. Instead, she said softly, "Play again." The janitor blinked. He thought he had misheard. He stared at her, his mouth opening in shock. What do you mean?" he stammered. "Play again," she repeated, louder this time. Her voice was firm but not cruel. Her friends gasped, unable to believe what they had just heard. No one had ever been allowed to touch her piano, and now, she was asking the janitor to do it a second time. The janitor shook his head quickly. "No, miss, I cannot. I shouldn't have touched it at all. Please forgive me." He stepped back as if distance could erase what had happened. His hands trembled, his shame heavy, but the girl leaned forward, her eyes never leaving him. "I said play," she insisted. Her tone carried weight, a mixture of authority and curiosity. She wanted to hear him again. She needed to know if what she had heard before was real. The janitor's heart pounded louder. He looked at the piano, then at her, then at the crowd of students who had gathered. All of them were waiting. Their eyes were wide, their breaths held. The hall felt like it had stopped breathing. The janitor swallowed hard. His whole body shook. His mind screamed at him to walk away, to save himself, but his soul whispered something else. Slowly, almost against his will, he stepped back toward the bench. He lowered himself onto it, his old hands hovered above the keys. He looked at her one last time, as if asking silently, "Are you sure?" She gave a single nod, and that was enough. He placed his fingers on the keys, and once again music filled the hall. The melody rose, soft and trembling at first, then stronger, richer. The notes flowed like water, like a story too deep for words. His body swayed gently. His eyes closed. He was lost again, lost in the world that only music could create. This time, though, he knew there were witnesses. He could feel their silence, but it did not break him. Instead, it gave him strength. The music grew more powerful, his soul poured through his hands, every note carried years of hidden pain, forgotten joy, and unspoken dreams. The students stood frozen. Their eyes were wide, their mouths slightly open. None of them had ever heard something like this. The janitor was not just playing notes. He was speaking to them through sound, telling a story that made their hearts ache. Their breaths caught as the music rose higher. Some felt their eyes sting with tears, though they did not understand why. The girl's face softened as she listened. Her lips parted slightly. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm. She had spent years playing that piano, winning trophies and applause. Yet in all that time, she had never made it sound like this. The janitor's touch brought life to every string, every chord. It was as if the piano itself had been waiting for him. When the last note faded, silence returned. It was heavy, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes after something too beautiful to describe. The janitor opened his eyes slowly. His fingers slipped away from the keys. His body sagged as if the music had taken all his strength. He looked around, expecting judgment, expecting anger, but the room remained still. No one moved. No one spoke. They all seemed trapped in the echo of the song. The girl finally stood. She looked at him not with anger, not with pride, but with respect. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but clear enough for everyone to hear. "You play, as if the piano belongs to you." The janitor lowered his gaze. His lips trembled. He had no words. His secret was no longer his. His music had been heard, and there was no turning back. And so the hall remained silent, the piano glowing softly under the lights, while everyone present tried to understand what had just happened. They had expected anger, punishment, shame. But instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary, something none of them would ever forget. The janitor sat frozen on the bench, his fingers still shaking from the last note. His heart beat like a drum inside his chest. He looked at the girl and her friends, their faces full of shock, and his fear returned like a wave. He had broken the rule. He had touched the untouchable piano, and now there was no hiding. He stood quickly, his knees weak. His hands moved nervously as he spoke. "I am sorry, I did not mean to disrespect. I should not have touched it." His voice cracked with shame. He kept his head low, afraid to meet their eyes. He felt smaller than ever, like a child caught doing something forbidden. Her friends exchanged whispers. Some of them frowned. One even smirked, as if waiting for the rich girl to punish him. Another muttered, "He'll be fired for sure." The janitor heard it and felt his chest tighten. He had no family to take care of him now, but this job was his only way to survive. If he lost it, he would have nothing. The silence grew heavier. The girl stood near the piano, her hand resting lightly on the polished surface. Her face was calm. Too calm. The janitor could not read her expression. Was she angry? Was she amused? He could not tell. He stepped back, his hands raised slightly as if to protect himself. "Please, I will never touch it again, I swear," he said quickly. His voice was almost pleading. He wanted her to forgive him, or at least ignore him. His only hope was to leave the room before things became worse, but she did not tell him to leave. Instead, she asked softly, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The question stunned him. His mouth opened, but no words came out. No one had ever asked him about his past. Not once in all the years he worked there. For the students and teachers, he was just a janitor, invisible, replaceable. The fact that she had noticed his music enough to ask made him feel exposed, as if she had pulled away the curtain he had been hiding behind. I used to play a long time ago," he finally whispered. His voice was heavy, filled with memories he did not want to share. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once danced freely over the keys, now rough and scarred from years of cleaning. The girl tilted her head slightly, her eyes searching his face. "You are not just a janitor," she said softly. Her friends gasped, surprised at her words. Some shifted uncomfortably, as if they could not understand why she would give him such respect. But the janitor shook his head. "No, miss, I am just a janitor now," he said. His voice was steady but sad. "My life is cleaning floors, not making music." He wanted to push the truth back into the shadows, away from the eyes of those who should never know it. Still, the girl did not look away. Her eyes remained on him. Her silence felt heavier than her words. The janitor felt trapped. His shame grew stronger. He remembered the way the music had flowed through him moments before, and he hated himself for giving in to temptation. For a brief moment he had felt alive again, but now all that was left was fear. The other students began to whisper louder. One said, "She should report him." Another replied, "But did you hear him? He was amazing." Their voices mixed. Filling the hall with tension, the janitor lowered his gaze further. He wanted them all to stop. He wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. Finally, the girl raised her hand, and silence fell again. She looked directly at the janitor and said, "Sit down." His heart stopped. He stared at her, unable to believe what he had just heard. "Miss, please, I cannot, I should leave," he said nervously. His feet shuffled, desperate to escape. "I said sit," she repeated, her voice firmer this time. Her eyes sharp but not cruel. She was not asking. She was commanding. The janitor hesitated. His fear battled with something else inside him, a small spark, the same spark that had pulled him to the piano in the first place. Slowly, unwillingly, he sat again. His body trembled as he lowered himself back onto the bench. "Play," she said, her voice steady. The janitor's mouth went dry. He wanted to refuse, to tell her he had already made a mistake once, but her gaze held him, and the silence of the room pressed him down. His hands hovered above the keys. He could feel the stares of every student burning into his back. For a moment he froze, but then, almost like magic, his fingers began to move again. The music rose softly, fragile at first, then stronger, richer. The sound filled the hall once more, wrapping around every listener like a warm cloak. This time, though, the janitor felt different. He was no longer lost in his own memories. He was painfully aware of the crowd, of the girl standing near him, of her eyes watching every movement. His heart raced, his fear alive, but still the music came as if his soul refused to stay silent. The whispers faded. The students grew quiet again. The music held them captive. Every note carried emotion too deep for words. His sorrow, his hope, his forgotten dreams all spilled out. He could feel tears prickling in his eyes, but he kept playing. When he finally stopped, the silence that followed was louder than applause. The janitor lowered his hands slowly. His head dropped. He could not look at them. He was certain he had crossed a line too far this time. The girl stepped forward, her face unreadable. She stood beside him, close enough that he could feel her presence. The janitor braced himself for anger, for punishment, but instead she spoke quietly, so quietly that it almost felt like a secret shared only between them. "You were meant to play." The words struck him harder than any scolding could have. His breath caught, his chest tightened. He wanted to answer, but no sound came. He had no defense, no denial. She had seen the truth inside him. The room stayed silent. The girl's friends looked between her and the janitor, their faces still stunned. No one laughed. No one mocked. Instead, they waited, as if they too understood that something important had just happened. The janitor lowered his head again, ashamed, overwhelmed, afraid, and yet, for the first time in years, a small part of him felt seen. The janitor sat on the bench, his body trembling as the silence of the hall pressed down on him. He had just played again because the girl told him to, and now he waited, not knowing what would happen next. His heart was heavy with fear, but also with something strange, a faint warmth. It had been years since anyone had listened to his music, years since his hands had touched the piano like this. The girl walked slowly around the piano, her shoes making soft clicks against the polished floor. Her friends followed at a distance, whispering to each other. They were confused, shocked, but they dared not interrupt her. The girl stopped in front of the janitor and looked down at him. Her expression was calm but serious. The janitor kept his eyes lowered, too afraid to meet her gaze. "You should not hide this," she said softly. Her voice was not angry. It carried a strange tone, part command, part wonder. The janitor shook his head quickly. "No, miss, please. I have no right. This is your piano, your world, not mine." His voice cracked. He gripped his knees to stop his hands from shaking. "I only clean the floors, that is all I am." But the girl leaned closer. "That is not all you are," she said firmly. The words cut through the air like a blade. The students behind her gasped. They had never heard her speak to anyone in such a way, especially not to someone like him. The janitor's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to deny her, but his voice failed him. His chest rose and fell as he tried to hold back the storm inside. "Play with me," she said suddenly. Her words were clear, strong, impossible to ignore. The janitor's head snapped up. His eyes widened in disbelief. What did you say?" he whispered. "Sit," she said, pulling out the bench so there was space beside her. "I will play, and you will play with me." The hall filled with stunned whispers. No one could believe what they were hearing. The rich girl, the proud pianist of the academy, asking the janitor to share her bench, to touch her piano, to play beside her. It was unthinkable. The janitor shook his head violently. "No, miss, I cannot, I should not. Please do not make me do this." His whole body trembled. His fear was stronger than before. He imagined the teachers walking in, the headmaster scolding him, losing his job, being thrown out. He imagined the shame, the laughter, the whispers, but the girl's eyes did not leave his. Her gaze was steady, commanding, but also filled with something else, something gentle. "Do not refuse," she said. "Sit beside me." The janitor's chest tightened. His breath came in short gasps. He looked at the piano, then at her, then at the crowd of students whose eyes were glued to him. His heart screamed at him to run, but his soul pulled him forward. Slowly, painfully, he moved to sit beside her. The bench creaked as he lowered himself. His hands hovered nervously above the keys. He felt out of place, smaller than ever, as if he did not belong. The girl placed her fingers on the keys. "Follow me," she said simply. Then she began to play. Her notes were strong, clear, practiced. They echoed in the hall with pride and confidence. The janitor hesitated. His fingers trembled above the keys. His heart pounded. He wanted to run away, but the sound of her playing reached him, pulled him in. His hands finally pressed down, a soft harmony rising under her melody. At first, he was clumsy, his fear breaking his rhythm. But then the music caught him. The sound grew fuller, richer. His fingers remembered what his mind tried to forget. Soon, their notes blended together, his sorrow and her pride weaving into one song. The students stood frozen, some with their mouths open, some with tears in their eyes. They had never seen her share the piano with anyone, let alone a janitor. And yet the music that filled the hall was more powerful than anything they had ever heard before. The girl glanced at him from the corner of her eye. She saw his fingers moving with grace, his face glowing with hidden fire. She realized in that moment that the piano had never truly sung for her. It was singing now because of him, because of the way he touched it. The janitor's heart swelled with a mixture of fear and freedom. For so long he had buried his music, hidden it deep inside, but now it flowed out of him, unchained, alive. The piano responded, its strings vibrating with joy. The sound grew so powerful that it seemed to lift the very walls of the hall. When the piece ended, silence fell like a blanket. Heavy, warm, unshakable. The janitor sat trembling, his chest heaving, his hands falling to his lap. He dared not look up, afraid of what he might see, but then the girl slowly stood. Her hand rested on the piano. She turned to the students, her eyes shining. "You all saw," she said softly. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. "This man is not just a janitor." The words rippled through the crowd like a shock. The janitor lowered his head, his eyes burning with tears he tried to hide. He felt both shame and pride, fear and relief. For the first time in many years he was seen, truly seen. The girl turned back to him, her eyes softened. "You gave this piano a voice I never knew it had," she said. Her tone was filled with something like respect, perhaps even gratitude. The janitor tried to answer, but his voice broke. He bowed his head deeper, unable to speak. His heart was too full. The hall remained silent, but it was not the silence of fear or judgment. It was the silence of awe, the silence of people who had witnessed something rare, something unforgettable. And for the janitor, who had lived his life in shadows, it was the first time he felt a small light shining on him again. The room was silent after the last note faded. The janitor sat frozen on the bench, his hands still resting on his knees, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He dared not look up. He felt as if his heart would stop if he saw their faces. He had broken every rule. He had touched what he should never touch. He had sat beside the rich girl as if he were her equal. It felt like a dream, but also like a mistake he could never take back. The students stood around the hall, some with wide eyes, some with parted lips. They had never seen anything like this before. Their whispers had stopped. Even, their breaths seemed careful. They had watched the janitor play with her, and it was something their minds could not understand. How could the man who scrubbed the floors play with such power, such emotion, such beauty? The janitor's body shook as he waited for her reaction. Surely now she would turn to him and tell him to leave. Surely she would remind him of his place. He was ready for the shame, ready for the punishment. His throat tightened as he whispered, "Forgive me, I had no right." His words barely reached her, but they carried all the fear in his soul. The girl, however, did not speak at once. She stood still, her hand resting gently on the piano. Her eyes were fixed on him, but not with anger. Her gaze was steady, calm, and strange, almost filled with thought. She looked at him as if she was seeing him for the very first time. The silence stretched longer. The janitor wished someone would shout, that someone would break the moment, but no one did. The students waited, their eyes darting between the girl and the old man. The air felt heavy, as though the whole academy was holding its breath. Finally, the girl moved. She stepped closer. To the janitor, her footsteps echoed on the polished floor. The sound made his heart beat even faster. He tried to shrink back, but he had nowhere to go. His body trembled as he braced himself, but instead of anger, her words surprised everyone. "You are a musician," she said softly. The janitor's head snapped up. His eyes widened in shock. No, miss, I am not," he stammered quickly, his voice cracked. "I was once, a long time ago, but not anymore. I am only a janitor now." He bowed his head again, ashamed. His past felt too far away, like a story that did not belong to him anymore. But the girl shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "You are a musician, I heard it. Everyone here heard it." She turned to her friends and the other students. "Did you not hear?" she asked. Her voice rose, commanding. The students shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded slowly, some whispered, "Yes, he played better than anyone here." Others looked down, unable to deny the truth. The janitor's music had touched them all. The janitor felt tears burning in his eyes. He had not wanted this. He had only wanted a moment alone with the piano, a moment to remember what it felt like. Now his secret was out. He felt naked, exposed in front of them all. His hands shook as he whispered, "Please don't say that. Please don't look at me like that." But the girl did not stop. She stepped closer until she was standing right beside him. Her hand rested gently on his shoulder. He flinched at her touch. It was soft, respectful, something he never expected from someone like her. "You made this piano speak," she said, quietly. Her words were filled with something close to wonder. "I have played it for years, but it never sounded like this. Tonight, it felt alive, and that was because of you." The janitor could not hold back anymore. A tear rolled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. "I had dreams once," he admitted in a broken voice. "I wanted to play, to travel, to let music be my life, but life had other plans. I had to work. I had to give it all up. And so I became what you see now. Just a man who cleans." His voice trailed off, filled with sorrow. The girl's eyes softened. For the first time, she understood that the man who had always been invisible in her world carried stories she could not imagine. He was not just a janitor. He was someone who had given up everything. And yet, the music still lived in him. The students shifted uneasily. Some looked guilty for the way they had ignored him for years. Others could not stop staring at him, as if they were seeing him as a person for the first time. The janitor felt their eyes on him and lowered his head deeper. His shame grew, but so did something else inside him. For the first time in many years, he felt his music had been heard, truly heard. He was afraid, but he was also alive. The girl finally spoke again, her voice strong. "From this day, no one will see you as just a janitor," she said. Her words echoed in the hall, firm and certain. "You are more than that. You are a musician, and your music will not be hidden anymore." Her words left the entire room speechless. Some of her friends gasped. Others covered their mouths in shock. They could not believe what they were hearing. The rich girl, proud and untouchable, was giving honor to the man they had all ignored. The janitor's heart ached. He did not know whether to feel proud or terrified. He had lived in shadows for so long, and now the light was too bright. He bowed his head again, whispering softly, "Thank you." His voice shook, but his words were sincere. The hall remained silent, not with judgment, but with awe. The students would never forget what they had seen that night. The janitor, the man they had thought was nothing, had filled the room with music that touched their hearts, and the rich girl, instead of punishing him, had lifted him up, showing them all that greatness could be hidden in places they never looked. The janitor wiped his eyes and stood slowly. His legs were weak, his heart heavy. He wanted to retreat into the shadows again, but he knew something had changed. He could no longer hide who he was, not after this night. The room remained quiet, as if waiting for him to speak again. But he said nothing. He only looked at the piano one last time, his eyes filled with both pain and gratitude. He turned to leave, but the echo of the music still lingered in the air, wrapping around everyone's hearts, reminding them of the man they had never truly seen until tonight. The last notes of the music still seemed to float in the air, even though the janitor's hands had left the keys long ago. The hall was filled with silence, but it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of hearts that had been touched. The students, the friends, even the rich girl herself stood still. Caught in the moment, the janitor lowered his head, his eyes heavy with tears. He felt small, exposed, and yet, in some strange way, alive. For years, he had lived quietly in the shadows, scrubbing floors, wiping windows, sweeping away dust. He had been invisible. But tonight, his music had broken through that wall. For the first time, he was not just a janitor. He was a man who carried music inside him. The rich girl looked at him, her expression calm but filled with respect. She stepped closer and placed her hand gently on the piano. "This piano belongs to my family," she said softly. "But tonight, it belonged to you." Her voice was steady, and the room grew even quieter as everyone listened. Her words carried weight, because no one had ever expected her to share her pride, her treasure, with anyone, especially not him. The janitor's lips trembled. He shook his head. "No, miss, it will always be yours. I am only a man who cleans." His voice was weak. His heart ached with both shame and gratitude, but she shook her head. "No," she replied firmly. "This music came from you. Not from me, not from my name, not from this piano, but from your soul." She turned to the crowd of students, her voice louder now. "All of you saw, all of you heard, he is not just a janitor, he is a musician." The students shifted, their faces stunned. Some looked down, ashamed that they had ignored him for so long. Some nodded slowly, remembering the way the music had touched them. Others whispered to each other, but none dared to laugh, none dared to deny what they had heard. The janitor felt his chest tighten. He wanted to argue, to push the honor away. He did not feel worthy of it. He had given up on music so long ago, and now, suddenly, it was being handed back to him. His hands trembled. As he whispered, "I lost it all. I had dreams once, but they died. Life forced me to bury them, and I became what I am now." His voice cracked. His words carried all the years of pain. The girl looked at him with soft eyes. "Dreams do not die," she said gently. "They wait, sometimes for years, sometimes for a lifetime, but they wait. Tonight, yours returned." Her words pierced through his soul. He felt something break inside him, something he had kept locked away for decades. A tear rolled down his cheek, but he did not wipe it this time. He let it fall. For once he did not hide. The students slowly began to clap. It started softly, uncertainly, but then grew louder, stronger, filling the hall with sound. The janitor's eyes widened. He had not expected applause. He had not expected respect. He had expected anger, punishment, shame. But now he stood in a hall of clapping hands, all of them honoring him. The janitor lowered his head again, unable to bear it. His heart was too full. He whispered to himself, "This cannot be real." But it was. Every clap echoed against the walls, carrying a message he had never heard before, that he mattered, that his music mattered. The rich girl raised her hand, and the applause slowly faded. She looked at him once more. "You reminded us all that greatness can hide where no one looks," she said softly. Her words were not only for him, but for everyone who had watched. It was a lesson they would carry forever. The janitor stood shakily, his legs weak, his body trembling. He felt like he was standing taller than he ever had before, though his back was bent with age. He looked at the piano one last time. The instrument gleamed under the lights. But now, it felt different. It no longer felt untouchable. It felt like a friend he had been reunited with. He turned to leave. His mop and bucket still rested against the wall. His old tools, the things that had defined his life for so long. He picked them up slowly, but this time his hands did not feel heavy. His eyes lifted to the doors, but his heart stayed with the music still ringing in the air. The girl watched him walk away. Her friends stayed silent, their faces thoughtful. They all knew something extraordinary had happened, something that would be told again and again. The night the janitor touched the piano and the rich girl did, not scold him, but honored him. Outside the hall, the janitor paused. He leaned against the wall. His heart was still racing, his eyes still wet. He closed them for a moment and smiled faintly. He had been afraid, ashamed, broken, but tonight had given him back a piece of himself he thought was gone forever. The story of that night spread quietly through the academy. Students whispered about it, teachers heard about it, and no one ever looked at the janitor the same way. Again, they still saw him cleaning floors, still saw him sweeping, but now they also saw something else. They saw a man who carried music in his soul. And for the janitor, life continued. His work did not change. His clothes were still plain, his shoes still heavy, but inside, he felt lighter. He no longer saw himself only as a shadow. He carried the memory of that night, the sound of the piano, the respect in her eyes, and the silence of a room that had once called him invisible but now saw him clearly. The lesson of that night lived on. It was not about wealth, or pride, or ownership. It was about respect, about the truth that talent and beauty can be hidden in the most unexpected places, and it was about courage, the courage of one man to touch the keys, and the courage of one girl to see him. And so the story ended not with shame, but with light. A janitor had played a piano, a rich girl had listened, and together they had left an entire room speechless.